Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to pause for a moment and reflect on this profound truth. Nothing, absolutely nothing can stop God's plan for your life. This isn't a cliche, it's a foundational principle that governs the universe. It is written in Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." My friends, if God said it, that settles it. God's plan for your life is not simply a suggestion or a possibility. It is a divine, sovereign blueprint that has been established since before time itself. The sovereignty of God's plan is an incredibly powerful truth that should inspire and reassure you in every circumstance of your life. The word sovereignty means supreme authority or control. When we speak of the sovereignty of God's plan, we are acknowledging that God, as the creator of the universe, has absolute control over all things, including your life. His plan is not random or subject to change. It is perfect, deliberate, and steadfast. There is something deeply comforting in knowing that God's plan for your life is unwavering. In a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable, where circumstances shift and change at a moment's notice, the fact that God's plan remains unchanged offers a sense of peace and security. What He has destined for you cannot be altered by any external force. People may try to divert you from your purpose, and you may face setbacks. But the blueprint that God has designed for your life is unshakable. It is firm and eternal, grounded in His unchanging nature. To truly grasp the sovereignty of God's plan, you must understand that His plan is much greater than any human idea of success. The way we measure success in the world through wealth, status, or influence is not how God measures success. God's plan is centered around His eternal purpose for you, which goes beyond temporary achievements or visible results. His plan involves the fullness of who you are, the fulfillment of your potential, and your alignment with His divine will for your life. It is about becoming who He created you to be and fulfilling the purpose He set before you. This understanding of sovereignty requires us to relinquish our desire to control every aspect of our lives. It means acknowledging that as human beings, we do not possess the ability to see the full picture. God's plan for us is much broader and deeper than our finite minds can comprehend. As Scripture tells us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord," Isaiah 55:8. God's ways are beyond our understanding, and the way He leads us may not always make sense in the moment. But we must trust that His plan is for our ultimate good. In recognizing God's sovereignty, we must also come to terms with the reality that God's plan is not subject to human manipulation. So often in life we are influenced by the opinions, desires, and expectations of others. People may try to push us in certain directions or impose their ideas of what our lives should look like. But God's plan for you is not influenced by the whims or expectations of others. It is solely determined by God Himself. No one, no matter how influential they may be, can change the direction of your life if you are following the path that God has laid out for you. Sometimes we allow ourselves to become discouraged when we face challenges or when things don't go according to our plans. However, we must remember that God's plan is often different from our own and may involve trials and hardships that refine us, shape our character, and prepare us for what lies ahead. These challenges are not signs that God's plan has failed or that His purpose for us is in jeopardy. Rather, they are part of the process. Think of it like a sculptor chiseling away at a block of marble. The process is not easy or quick, but it is necessary to bring out the masterpiece hidden within. Similarly, the difficulties you face are shaping and refining you for the purpose God has called you to fulfill. The sovereignty of God's plan also means that there is no force in this world, no matter how powerful, that can stop it from being fulfilled. The Bible is full of examples of people who face seemingly insurmountable obstacles, only to see God's plan unfold in miraculous ways. Consider the story of Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers, imprisoned under false accusations, and seemingly forgotten. Yet God's plan for Joseph's life could not be stopped. In the end, Joseph rose to a position of great influence in Egypt and was able to save not only his family but an entire nation from famine. Despite the hardships he faced, God's plan for Joseph's life was unstoppable. Consider the life of Jesus. He was born in humble circumstances, was rejected by many, and ultimately was crucified. From a human perspective, it may have seemed like God's plan was failing. But the death of Jesus was part of God's ultimate plan of redemption for the world. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross and his resurrection fulfilled the divine purpose of salvation. No one, not even the forces of darkness, could thwart God's plan. This gives us great hope and confidence. When you are walking in alignment with God's plan, you are operating in the realm of divine authority. Nothing can stand against it. Your enemies, your failures, your fears, none of these can stop what God has ordained for you. There may be delays, detours, or difficulties along the way, but God's purpose for your life is unbreakable. What he has spoken over you will come to pass in his perfect timing. Understanding the sovereignty of God's plan invites us to live with a greater sense of purpose and direction. When you know that your life is not a random series of events but is part of a grand design, it changes the way you approach every day. You begin to live with intention, knowing that every step you take is part of a divine process. Even when things seem uncertain or unclear, you can trust that God is at work behind the scenes, orchestrating everything for your good and his glory. God's sovereignty also calls for a response from us. It invites us to trust him fully and surrender our own plans to his greater purpose. It requires us to have faith, even when we cannot see the entire picture, knowing that the one who holds the world in his hands is also holding our lives. The sovereignty of God's plan is an invitation to trust, surrender, and align our lives with his will, knowing that it will lead us to the fullness of what he has prepared for us. The sovereignty of God's plan means that his will cannot be hindered or undone. No matter what happens in your life, God's purpose for you will prevail. Trust in the unshakable foundation of his plan and know that nothing, no matter how difficult, can thwart the incredible destiny he has in store for you. Before you were born, before you took your first breath, before you even had a chance to make decisions or shape your own destiny, God knew you. He had already mapped out your purpose, and that purpose is inseparable from the very essence of who you are. Purpose precedes creation. It was before you came into being, and it is what gives meaning to your life. This truth is foundational in understanding that you are not here by chance, but by divine design. The very fact that you exist is evidence that God has a plan for you, a plan that he set in motion before time itself. To grasp the depth of this, we must first understand that God's creation is purposeful. Everything he has made, including you, is part of a larger intentional design. There are no accidents in God's kingdom. You are not a random occurrence or a byproduct of circumstance. Your life is the result of divine thought and intention. It's not a coincidence that you are here in this moment, at this time, with the gifts, abilities that you have. The creator of the universe designed you specifically with a purpose that only you can fulfill. In Psalm 139:13-16, the psalmist declares, "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful." I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. This passage is a powerful reminder that long before you were born, God knew you intimately. He knew the intricacies of your personality, your strengths, your weaknesses, and the purpose He had assigned to your life. Your purpose was not an afterthought, nor is it something you need to figure out by yourself. It was predetermined by God, who is the ultimate author of your story. The beauty of this truth lies in the assurance that nothing in your life, no matter how unexpected or difficult, can alter the purpose that God has set for you. People may come and go, circumstances may shift, and you may face trials and challenges, but none of these things can change the purpose for which you were created. God's purpose for your life is anchored in His eternal will, and nothing on earth can derail it. Many times we find ourselves searching for our purpose in the midst of uncertainty, unsure of what we are meant to do or where we are headed. The world often encourages us to look outward for direction through success, wealth, fame, or social approval, but God calls us to look inward, to seek His face and understand the purpose He has placed in our hearts. Purpose is not something you stumble upon through trial and error. It is something you discover through relationship with the Creator. As you spend time with God, align yourself with His will, and seek His guidance, your purpose will become clearer. It's also important to recognize that God's purpose for you is not necessarily tied to the conventional idea of success or achievement. We tend to measure success in terms of wealth, status, or the approval of others. But God's view of success is much different. His plan for you may not always lead to earthly fame or riches, but it will always lead to fulfillment and the fulfillment of the purpose for which you were created. It may involve sacrifice, challenges, and even moments of obscurity. But these are the very things that refine you and prepare you for the role you are called to play in His kingdom. When God called him, he was young and felt inadequate for the task. He struggled with the idea that he was too young or too inexperienced to fulfill such a monumental purpose. But God assured him that his purpose was not dependent on his age, experience, or qualifications. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart, Jeremiah 1:5. God's plan for Jeremiah was already established, and it was not up to Jeremiah to figure it out on his own. All he had to do was respond to God's calling and trust that He would equip him for the task. Your purpose, like Jeremiah's, is a divine calling that transcends the limitations of your current circumstances. You may not always feel ready, equipped, or capable, but God has already prepared you for the journey ahead. He has given you everything you need to fulfill your purpose, even if you don't see it all now. The Apostle Paul reminds us in Philippians 1:6, being confident of this, that He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. The process of fulfilling your purpose is not about your ability, but about God's faithfulness to complete the work He has started in you. Sometimes the process of discovering your purpose can be long and challenging. It may involve moments of uncertainty, waiting, and growth. But in those moments, it is crucial to remember that the waiting is not wasted. God is preparing you, molding you, and equipping you for what lies ahead. The challenges you face along the way are not signs of failure, but opportunities for growth. Each trial is a stepping stone toward the fulfillment of the divine purpose that has been set before you. Your purpose is also not isolated. It is part of a larger story that God is telling through the lives of His people. God's plan for you is intricately connected to His plan for others. You were designed to impact the world around you, to make a difference in the lives of those you encounter, and to be a vessel through which God's love and grace are made manifest. Your purpose is not for your own glory, but for the glory of God. When you embrace the fact that your purpose is part of a larger plan, you gain a deeper sense of responsibility and fulfillment. The truth that purpose precedes creation is a reminder that your life has value and meaning. You were not created by accident, and there is no such thing as a purposeless existence. No matter where you are in life, whether you are just starting out or have faced setbacks along the way, can rest assured that God's plan for you has always been in motion. Your purpose is already written, and all that remains is for you to step into it with faith, trust, and obedience. As you walk out your purpose, remember that it is not just about achieving a goal or reaching a destination. It is about becoming the person God created you to be, the person who fulfills the unique role He has assigned. Your purpose is a journey of transformation, one that will shape and mold you into a reflection of His glory. And as you embrace that purpose, you will find true fulfillment, not because of what you accomplish, but because you are living in alignment with the divine calling that was placed upon you before time began. Life is full of challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but it's crucial to understand that trials are temporary, while purpose is eternal. Every challenge you face is a part of your journey, a necessary stepping stone that prepares you for the fulfillment of the purpose that God has set before you. In those difficult moments, when things seem uncertain and the weight of the world feels heavy, you must remember that these trials are not the final destination, they are only temporary. God's ultimate purpose for your life, the reason for your existence, is eternal and unshakable. The reality of life is that it's not always smooth sailing. There are times when you feel like you're in a storm, tossed and turned by circumstances beyond your control. It can feel as if everything is falling apart, and you might begin to question whether you will ever make it through. But it's in those moments that God's eternal purpose for you becomes even more significant. You see, challenges aren't designed to defeat you. They are designed to develop you. They push you to grow, to become stronger, and to rely more fully on God's grace and strength. The Apostle Paul provides a powerful perspective on this in 2 Corinthians 4:17, when he says, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." Paul, who faced extreme persecution, hardship, and suffering, understood that trials are temporary, but they serve a greater eternal purpose. Every hardship he encountered was molding him for a greater work that God had prepared for him. And the same is true for you. What you go through is not without purpose. It is part of God's divine plan that will ultimately lead to greater things. In the midst of trials, it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. We tend to focus on the pain, the frustration, or the disappointment of the moment, and it's hard to see beyond that. But the key to navigating life's difficulties is to remember that they are temporary. The pain you feel today is not permanent, and neither are the challenges you face. In the grand scheme of your life, these obstacles are just brief moments in time, fleeting and momentary. However, God's purpose for you is eternal, lasting forever. Your trials are temporary because they are bound by time and circumstance. They may last a season, but eventually that season will pass. You may be in the midst of a storm right now, but it will not last forever. Just as seasons change in nature, so too will the seasons of your life. Even in your darkest moments, you can trust that God has a greater purpose for you that will outlast the trials you face. Psalm 35 reminds us that weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Your pain is not forever, and God promises that His plans for you will bring forth joy, peace, and fulfillment in due time. Purpose, on the other hand, transcends time. It is eternal and unchanging. The purpose God has designed for your life was set before you were even born, and it will remain with you throughout your entire journey. When you understand that your trials are temporary, you can begin to see them from a new perspective. Instead of being overwhelmed by your circumstances, you can look beyond them to the bigger picture, your purpose. This shift in perspective allows you to endure hardships with a sense of hope and faith. Even when life is difficult, you can trust that it is not in vain. God is using your challenges to shape you, to refine you, and to bring you closer to the fulfillment of the purpose He has placed in your life. The key to persevering through trials is faith. It is the belief that God's plans for you are good, even when your circumstances don't align with that belief. Faith allows you to see beyond the temporary struggle and focus on the eternal purpose. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see." Even when you don't see how the trial you're facing will lead to a greater purpose, faith allows you to trust that God is working behind the scenes. Every obstacle, every setback, and every challenge is an opportunity to grow in your faith and trust in God's sovereignty over your life. Another important aspect of navigating trials is the realization that God is with you in the midst of them. You are not walking through difficulties alone. In Isaiah 43:2, God promises, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned, the flames will not set you ablaze." God's presence in your life is constant, and He is always with you, even in the darkest times. His presence is a reminder that the trials you face are not meant to break you, they are meant to refine you and prepare you for what He has ahead. It's also important to recognize that your trials are not just about you. They are often part of a larger picture that involves other people. How you navigate your challenges can be a testimony to others of God's faithfulness. Your perseverance in the face of difficulty can inspire others to keep going, to trust in God's plan for their own lives. Your story of overcoming adversity can be a source of hope to those who are struggling. In this way, your trials serve a greater purpose not only in shaping you, but in helping others as well. God uses trials to develop qualities in you that are necessary for the fulfillment of your purpose. Patience, endurance, perseverance, and character, all forged in the fire of trials. These qualities are not developed in times of ease, but in the midst of adversity. James 1:2-4 encourages us, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Each trial you face is an opportunity for you to grow and mature in your faith, which prepares you to step into the fullness of your purpose. While trials may be difficult, they are not permanent. They are temporary. And they are part of the process of fulfilling the eternal purpose God has set for your life. Every trial you face is an opportunity to grow, to strengthen your faith, and to be refined into the person God created you to be. Keep your eyes focused on the bigger picture, the eternal purpose that God has for you. Trust that in the end, your trials will be used for good, and that they are working together to fulfill God's greater plan for your life. Through it all, remember that purpose is eternal, and God's purpose for you will always prevail. When we speak of the sovereignty of God's plan and its unshakable nature, it's vital to understand that God's timing is integral to the fulfillment of that plan. Timing is a crucial element in the unfolding of God's purpose in your life, and it is never early or late. His timing is always perfect. God's plans are not only steadfast and unchangeable, but they are also strategically and intentionally timed. The difficulty that many of us face is the tension between our desire for immediate results and God's perfect timing, which often unfolds gradually over time. However, embracing the truth that God's timing is always perfect can bring a deep sense of peace and reassurance, even when the waiting seems difficult. It's important to remember that God's sense of timing is far greater than our own understanding. As human beings, we are bound by the limitations of time. We are governed by our daily schedules, deadlines, and the urgency of the moment. This makes it hard for us to see beyond what is immediately in front of us. Our tendency is to want everything now, to rush toward our goals, to speed through the process, and to see results instantly. But God does not operate on the same timeline as we do. His view of time is eternal, and He sees the beginning, middle, and end of every story all at once. As a result, the timing of His plan for your life is perfectly calibrated to lead you into the fullness of what He has in store for you. In the book of Ecclesiastes, the author reminds us of the inherent wisdom in God's timing. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens, Ecclesiastes 3:1. This truth underscores that there is a purpose for each season in life, whether it be a time of growth, a time of testing, or a time of waiting. Each season is essential for preparing you for the next phase of God's plan for your life. Just as a farmer must wait for the right season to plant and harvest his crops, God has designed a season of preparation in your life, which will make the eventual fulfillment of His purpose possible. You might not always understand the season you are in, but trust that it is part of God's perfect timing. One of the most challenging aspects of understanding God's timing is dealing with the period of waiting. It is often in these waiting seasons that doubts, frustrations, and impatience begin to arise. We may question why things aren't happening faster, why it feels like progress is slow, or why we haven't yet reached the place we believe we should be. But it is important to realize that waiting is not a sign of delay or failure. It is, in fact, a significant part of God's divine plan. Waiting gives you the opportunity to prepare for what is ahead, to grow in character, and to deepen your trust in God's faithfulness. It allows God to work in your life in ways that would not be possible if you rushed ahead before His timing. Consider the story of Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a child, a son who would become the father of a great nation. Yet for many years they were childless, and the promise seemed impossible. As time went on, they began to grow impatient and took matters into their own hands, which led to complications. But God's promise was never in doubt. It simply needed to unfold in His time. Eventually, when Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was well beyond childbearing age, God fulfilled His promise, and they had Isaac. This story highlights the importance of trusting in God's timing, even when it seems impossible or delayed. God's plan for their lives could not be rushed, and when it was finally fulfilled, it was all the more miraculous because it happened in God's perfect timing. The life of Joseph demonstrates how God's timing was essential in preparing him for his destiny. Joseph's journey from being sold into slavery by his brothers to rising as the second in command in Egypt is a story marked by long seasons of waiting, testing, and preparation. There were times when Joseph could have questioned God's timing or doubted the promise he received in his dreams, but he chose to trust that God was at work behind the scenes. Joseph's promotion to a position of power in Egypt was not an overnight occurrence. It took years of trials, setbacks, and waiting for the right moment. But in the end, God's timing was perfect, and Joseph was able to fulfill his purpose of saving his family and entire nation from famine. This understanding of God's timing helps us navigate our own seasons of waiting. When you are in a season of waiting, it can feel as though things are stagnant or not moving forward. But in reality, God is working even when you cannot see it. The waiting season is not a waste of time, it is a time of preparation. Just as a seed must be buried in the ground before it can sprout and grow into a plant, God may be using your waiting period to cultivate the character, strength, and wisdom you will need for what lies ahead. Without the right preparation, the fulfillment of your purpose could overwhelm you or cause you to miss the lessons God wants you to learn along the way. Waiting is part of God's plan to ensure that you are ready when the time comes. God's timing also aligns with His overall plan for the world. The fulfillment of His promises in your life is not just about you, it is also about His broader plan for humanity. God is working in the lives of countless people and weaving together events that will bring about His divine will. Your waiting may be part of a larger tapestry that only God can see in its entirety. It's often difficult for us to understand how our individual timing fits into the bigger picture, but trust that God is orchestrating everything according to His perfect will. Another aspect of God's perfect timing is the realization that his plans are never hindered by obstacles. Even when it seems like things are not progressing or circumstances are working against you, God's purposes will always prevail. The delays you encounter are not roadblocks to his will, they are simply part of his plan. His timing is not subject to the limitations of our circumstances. For example, when the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, it appeared as though God's promises to them were delayed. But when the time was right, God delivered them with a mighty hand, fulfilling his promise to give them the land he had sworn to their ancestors. His timing was perfect, and nothing could stop the fulfillment of his plan. Understanding and embracing God's perfect timing requires trust. It requires you to trust that he knows what is best for you and that his plan is unfolding in the best way possible. Even in the midst of waiting, you can trust that God is faithful and that his timing will always be for your good. Psalm 27:14 encourages us, wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord. Waiting is an act of faith. It is a declaration that you trust God's plan and timing even when it seems slow or uncertain. When you wait on God, you are positioning yourself to receive the fullness of his promises, knowing that he will bring them to pass in his perfect time. God's perfect timing is one of the most important aspects of his sovereign plan. His timing is always right, and it is never early or late. As you walk through life, remember that the waiting seasons are not wasted, but are part of God's intentional plan to prepare you for what lies ahead. Trust in his timing and know that every delay is simply a step toward the fulfillment of the purpose he has set for you. God's plan for your life is not just a set of random events or a series of disconnected moments. It is intricately woven together, designed with precision and purpose. The purpose God has for you is not an isolated task. It is part of a grand divine narrative that spans generations and influences the world around you. Every moment, every decision, and every experience you have is an essential part of this larger eternal plan. This understanding brings a deep sense of meaning and responsibility. Your life has a purpose, and it is interconnected with the greater story that God is unfolding in the world. To fully grasp the magnitude of this truth, we must first understand that God's purpose for you is part of his eternal plan. In Ephesians 2:10, the Apostle Paul writes, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." This verse clearly communicates that God has preordained works for each of us to do. These works are not random acts or insignificant tasks, but integral parts of a greater plan that God has been working out since the beginning of time. You were created with specific purposes in mind, and your life is a piece of a much larger puzzle. The way your life unfolds is not by chance, but is directed by a divine hand that knows the beginning and end of the story. God's plan for you, while personal and unique, is also interconnected with the lives of others. The experiences you go through, the lessons you learn, and the wisdom you gain are not just for your benefit, they are meant to impact the world around you. There are people in your life, even those you may not know yet, whose paths will cross with yours at the appointed time. Your life will touch others in ways you may never fully understand. This is the beautiful complexity of God's purpose. It extends beyond your own life and weaves into the lives of others. The relationships, opportunities, and experiences you encounter are not coincidental. They are part of the tapestry that God is weaving through the lives of his people. Think of how the lives of biblical figures like Esther, Moses, and David intersected with the lives of others, and how their individual purposes played a crucial role in the unfolding of God's broader plan. Esther, for example, was a young Jewish woman who became queen of Persia when her people were facing annihilation. Her position allowed her to influence the king and save the Jewish nation. Her life, though seemingly ordinary, was part of a much grander plan, and her willingness to embrace her purpose brought about deliverance for an entire nation. Her story reminds us that our lives, no matter how seemingly small or insignificant, are a thread in the larger narrative God is creating. God's purpose for us is not just for our own good. It is also for the good of those around us, for His kingdom, and for His glory. When you understand that your purpose is part of a greater plan, it brings clarity to the difficult moments in your life. There will be times when you may feel as though your life is insignificant or that the things you are doing don't matter. But when you recognize that your purpose is part of God's eternal plan, you can take comfort in knowing that even in the mundane, you are part of something greater. Every action, every choice, and every step you take is moving you closer to the fulfillment of God's purpose. This is particularly important during times when you feel like you're not making progress, or when your current circumstances feel disconnected from the greater vision you believe God has for your life. Even in seasons of obscurity or difficulty, trust that you are not lost or forgotten. God is working through you and in you, preparing you for what lies ahead. God also uses the experiences and talents He has given you to fulfill His purpose. There are unique gifts and abilities that you possess, whether it's a skill, a talent, or a passion, that are meant to be used in service to God and others. You were not created with random gifts. Each one was given to you with purpose. In 1 Peter 4:10, we are reminded to use whatever gifts we have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. Your gifts are not for your personal gain. They are for the advancement of God's kingdom and for the benefit of those around you. When you use your talents and abilities in alignment with God's will, you become a vessel for His purpose in the world. This could be in your career, your relationships, or your ministry. Whatever area of life you find yourself in, you are called to use your gifts for God's glory. God's purpose for you is also relational. It is about building relationships with others that reflect His love, grace, and truth. At the heart of God's purpose for your life is the call to love others as He has loved you. The relationships you cultivate, whether with family, friends, colleagues, or even strangers, are an essential part of your purpose. Through these relationships, God works to reveal His love and His plan to others. You may never know the full impact your life has on those around you, but God uses your interactions with others to further His kingdom. Your relationships are a key component of God's larger plan, and when you view them through this lens, you begin to see them as opportunities to share His love and reflect His character. As you walk in God's purpose, it is essential to recognize that the pursuit of your calling requires obedience. Obedience is the pathway that leads to the fulfillment of God's plans. Sometimes this obedience will require sacrifice, patience, and perseverance. There will be times when the path is difficult, when you are called to step out of your comfort zone or make decisions that seem risky or counter to conventional wisdom. But trusting in God's greater plan and purpose will give you the courage to follow His leading, even when the road ahead is unclear. The fulfillment of God's purpose for your life is not about following your own desires or ambitions, but about submitting to His will and allowing Him to lead you. The beautiful truth is that even when things don't make sense, even when obstacles arise, or even when your journey takes unexpected turns, God is still working. His plans for you are not subject to the whims of circumstance or chance. They are anchored in His eternal wisdom. Just as a master architect designs a building with every detail in mind, so too does God meticulously design your life to fit perfectly into His larger plan. There is a divine order to everything that happens in your life, and nothing is wasted. Every success, every failure, every joy, and every heartbreak is part of the grand narrative God is writing through you. While personal to you, is also part of a much larger story. It is not just about what you can accomplish in this world, but about how you fit into God's eternal plan. As you embrace this understanding, you begin to see that your life has an impact far beyond your own understanding. God's purpose for you is always unfolding in ways that may surprise you, and it is always moving forward, no matter what you may face. Your life is significant in the grand scheme of God's plan, and by walking in His purpose, you are contributing to the fulfillment of His eternal narrative. It is essential to recognize that God's plan for your life is built on a foundation of trust, and that trust is deeply intertwined with the idea that His purpose is not limited to what we can see with our natural eyes. In our world, we tend to rely heavily on what we can observe, what we can measure, and what we can control. We want certainty and immediate results. However, God's purpose often requires us to step beyond our comfort zone and into the realm of faith, trusting that even when things seem unclear or uncertain, He is still in control and His plan will come to fruition. When we talk about trusting God with our lives, we are acknowledging that we don't have all the answers. We don't know what the future holds, and many times we can't predict how certain events will unfold. It can feel like stepping into the unknown, and that can be uncomfortable. But it is in those moments of uncertainty that God calls us to trust Him completely. Proverbs 3:5-6 encourages us with the words, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight." This passage reminds us that our understanding is limited, but God's wisdom is infinite. While we may not see the full picture or understand the way forward, God is working on our behalf, and His plan is unfolding in ways that will ultimately lead us to His purpose for our lives. Trusting in God's plan also involves surrendering our own will and desires. We often have plans, dreams, and expectations for our lives. We envision a certain outcome or a specific path, and we want things to unfold according to our timetable. But God's plan is often different from our own. It may take us down paths we never expected or lead us into seasons of waiting, testing, and refinement. There are moments when we are called to let go of our own ideas about what should happen and trust that God's way is far better than anything we could have imagined. This surrender can be difficult because we want control, but surrendering to God's plan requires faith that His purpose is greater than our own, and that He is trustworthy even when things don't go the way we expect. Consider the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Just before His arrest and crucifixion, He prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Matthew 26:39. Jesus, in His humanity, expressed His desire to avoid the pain and suffering that lay ahead, but He ultimately trusted in the Father's will. He surrendered His own will to the greater purpose that was at work through His sacrifice. This moment in Jesus' life is a powerful example of trusting God's plan even when it involves hardship, sacrifice, and uncertainty. Jesus' trust in the Father's plan changed the course of history and provided a way for all of humanity to be reconciled to God. Similarly, when we trust God's plan for our lives, we participate in His greater purposes, even when the path seems difficult. Hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. This passage reminds us that when we trust in God's plan, He gives us the strength to endure. Even when things feel slow or when progress seems minimal, God is working behind the scenes, and His timing is always perfect. Patience allows us to trust that He will fulfill His promises, even when we can't see the full picture right now. One of the most challenging aspects of trusting God is learning to trust Him in the face of disappointment and setbacks. There will be times when things don't go according to our plan, when doors close, and when circumstances take unexpected turns. It can be easy to become discouraged or question whether God is really in control. But it is in those moments that we must lean into our trust in Him even more. Romans 8:28 gives us a powerful reminder that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Even when things don't make sense, God is still at work. What seems like a setback or disappointment may actually be a redirection, preparing us for something greater than we could have imagined. Trusting God means knowing that He is working all things together for our good, even when we can't see how. Another important aspect of trusting God is the realization that His ways are higher than our ways. We may not always understand why certain things happen or why God allows certain circumstances in our lives. But we can trust that He is infinitely wise and that His plan is always for our benefit. Isaiah 55:8-9 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." God's perspective is eternal, and He sees things from an angle that we cannot. What seems like a detour or a challenge may be part of the bigger picture that God is orchestrating in your life. Trusting Him means allowing Him to lead even when we don't fully understand the path. Trusting God also involves having confidence in His goodness. God is good, and His heart toward us is full of love and compassion. His plan for our lives is not to harm us, but to give us hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. When we trust that God's plans are motivated by His goodness and love, we can have peace, even in the midst of uncertainty. Trusting in God's goodness allows us to rest in the assurance that no matter what happens, He is always for us and never against us. Trusting God is not a passive act. It is an active choice. It is a decision to rely on Him daily, to seek His guidance, and to follow His lead even when the way forward is unclear. Trusting in God's plan requires us to take action in faith, knowing that He will direct our steps. It's a daily commitment to surrender our own desires and plans and to follow Him, knowing that His plan is greater and more fulfilling than anything we could plan on our own. Trusting in God's plan for your life is an essential part of walking in His purpose. It requires surrendering our own will, embracing patience, persevering through disappointments, and having confidence in His goodness. When we trust God, we align ourselves with His eternal purpose and allow Him to work through us, even when the journey is uncertain or difficult. Trusting in God's plan is not always easy, but it is always worth it. His plans for us are always for our good. And when we trust Him, we can walk confidently, knowing that He is leading us into the fulfillment of His divine purpose. Understanding that nothing can stop God's plan for your life, no matter what obstacles, challenges, or opposition you face, is a crucial truth that can empower you to move forward in faith. This unwavering confidence in God's plan is rooted in the belief that He is both sovereign and all-powerful. When we grasp the enormity of God's ability to accomplish His will, regardless of the circumstances, we find peace in knowing that His purposes will always prevail. His plan for your life is unstoppable because it is divinely orchestrated, and no power on earth, be it people, situations, or even our own shortcomings, can ultimately thwart what God has set in motion. It is important to recognize that God's plans are never dependent on human circumstances. God is not limited by the forces that seem to be working against you. Whether you face opposition from others, physical limitations, or even spiritual battles, God's purpose will not be deterred. In fact, throughout Scripture, we see example after example of how God uses obstacles and opposition to bring about His will. Take, for example, the story of Joseph. Joseph faced betrayal by his brothers, slavery, false accusations, imprisonment, and a series of setbacks. However, none of these obstacles were able to stop God's plan for his life. In the end, Joseph rose to power in Egypt, fulfilling the purpose God had for him, which was to save many people from famine, including the very brothers who had betrayed him. Through all the adversity Joseph faced, nothing could stop the divine plan that God had for him. When we look at the lives of Moses and the Israelites, we see another powerful example of how God's plan is unstoppable. God's people were enslaved in Egypt for hundreds of years under harsh oppression. Even when Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler of the time, resisted and refused to let them go, nothing could prevent God's will from being done. Despite Pharaoh's hardened heart and the plagues that ravaged Egypt, God's plan to free the Israelites and bring them into the promised land unfolded exactly as He had planned. Even when the Israelites faced insurmountable obstacles like the Red Sea, God made a way where there seemed to be no way. His plan for them was unstoppable, and no earthly power could change that. This understanding that nothing can stop God's plan extends beyond historical accounts to your own life. It is important to recognize that the same God who parted the Red Sea, who raised up Joseph for such a time as his, and who fulfilled his promises to his people, is the same God at work in your life today. Whatever challenges you may face, whatever obstacles seem insurmountable, know that they are not a match for the power of God. His plan for you is secured in his sovereignty, and he is more than able to bring it to pass. One of the reasons God's plan cannot be stopped is that it is built on his perfect will. God's will is always in line with his character. He is faithful, just, and good. He never promises something that he will not bring to fruition. His will is not subject to the whims of people or the capriciousness of circumstance. When God speaks, his words are powerful and carry authority. In Isaiah 55:11, God says, "So is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it." This truth reveals the incredible power of God's word and his will. When he speaks something into being, it will come to pass. Nothing in this world can alter or undo his purposes. Another key reason that nothing can stop God's plan for your life is that he has already seen the end from the beginning. God exists outside of time, and he knows every detail of your life. Psalm 139:16 reminds us that God saw our unformed body, and all the days ordained for us were written in his book before one of them came to be. This means that while we experience life moment by moment, God sees the entire journey in its fullness. There is no moment in your life that catches God by surprise, and there is no situation that is beyond his ability to navigate. He knows the struggles you will face, the decisions you will have to make, and the obstacles that will appear in your path. But he has already prepared a way for you, and his plan will not be thwarted by the challenges you encounter. God's plan for your life cannot be stopped because it is backed by his infinite power. We serve a God who has all authority and dominion over the earth. Matthew 28:18 declares, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." This verse affirms that there is no power greater than God. He is the ultimate authority, and when he decides to accomplish something, nothing in heaven or on earth can stand in his way. His power is limitless and his strength is unmatched. When we recognize that God's plan is backed by his omnipotence, we begin to understand that no matter what resistance or challenges we face, they are powerless in comparison to God's power. You may feel like you are standing in the face of insurmountable difficulties. You might be facing financial struggles, relationship problems, or health issues, and it may seem as though the world is working against you. But even in those moments, you can take comfort in the truth that God's plan for you cannot be stopped. The challenges you face are temporary, but God's purposes are eternal. The Bible assures us in Romans 8:31 that if God is for us, who can be against us? This verse is a reminder that no matter what opposition you may face, God is on your side, and his plan will prevail. He will give you the strength to overcome every obstacle that comes your way.